Rovno začneme s našim programom a prvým hostom, prvým rečníkom bude rumunský host Cristian Lupsa a nie je to náhoda, že práve Cristianom začíname túto konferenciu Connected, pretože jeho konferencia The Power of Storytelling, čiže sila rozprávačstva, ktorú organizuje v Bukurešti, je tak trochu predobrazom alebo takým nepriamym vzorom tejto našej akcie tu v Bratislave. Je to skutočne pozorhodná akcia, ktorú tam vybudovali so špičkovými rečníkmi, ktorí všetci z rôznych oblastí sa zaoberajú tým, čo je príbeh, čo je rozprávanie v najrozličnejších oblastiach života. Okrem toho, Cristian nie je prvýkrát na Slovensku, je tu už asi tretí raz, pozná veľmi dobre žurnalistické prostredie, pozná tunajšie médiá, školil tu aj študentov, aj profesionálov a hlavne jeho veľká téma je long read, čiže dlhé texty, dlhé eseistické texty, reportáže. Tie vydáva v štvrťročníku, ktorý sa volá DOR. To je možno nákladom menší, ale obsahom veľmi dôležitý magazín v Rumunsku a preto si veľmi cením, že Cristian Lupsa dnes urobí svoju prezentáciu a potom, ešte raz pripomínam, môžete sa ho pýtať, posielajte svoje otázky, pripojte sa na slajdov a Cristian, please, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us. Poprosím vás, môžete ho aj povzbudiť potleskom.
Can you hear me? Because I'm not, so I guess the mic is on. Hello, thank you for having me here. This is an honor. It's my third time in Bratislava in a year. I've been to Bratislava more often now in the past year than I've been to my hometown. So my father and my girlfriend do ask me if people actually want me here because I have something to say, or if there's anything shady going on between me and my unknown friends here in Slovakia. So thank you again very much. It's an honor to share a day with Nina and Francesca and the wonderful people that will speak to you. And I will talk mostly about journalism and how we tell stories about human rights, about social justice, about very difficult things in Romania, and hopefully some of these stories will be helpful to you. It's pretty weird for a Romanian to be asked to come and share their wisdom. If you don't know, we're partly the reason why Britain voted for Brexit. We're used to ask to leave places, not to come to places. So this is a change for me. And a few weeks ago, I was talking to some Slovak journalists in Bucharest who came to interview people there about our anti-corruption efforts. And I looked at them and thought, it's really weird, and you probably have this feeling for someone in a former communist country to be given an example to be given as an example of things that work. I don't know how that happened, but I was very grateful. Very grateful for that. So this is what I do. This is the magazine I edit. It's called DOR. It's a quarterly. We're an NGO, and we publish this 4 times a year. We do, as Mikhail said, long-form stories on a lot of topics. We don't have a particular beat. We usually cover complicated issues or interesting figures in Romania. We focus a lot on social issues, and we deal a lot with, not overtly, so we don't touch on this directly, but we're very preoccupied with how Romania finds its identity. It's been 25, 26 years since communism, and you might have this feeling here too. We don't really know who we are as a country, and it's not getting easier. Actually, it's probably getting more difficult in the times we live in. And this is a strawberry with mold on it, so that's not a nice wintry picture. And I think this speaks volumes to the way the world is today. And partly the reason we chose this photograph is because the world is a little complicated these days, as you know. You know, remember these guys giving likes to golden elevators everywhere? World is complicated today. I was reading Slovak news in the days before coming here, and if I got this correctly, to be recognized as a religion in Slovakia, now you have to have 50,000 practitioners. And I stumbled upon this quote by one of your politicians. Islamization starts with a kebab and it's already underway in Bratislava. So, as I said, this is my third time in Bratislava, and I always tell my friends, this city is gorgeous. The downtown is beautiful. The people are amazing. And then every year I come and you find some new, niche to pick on. And I need to show you this. There's more things you don't like. And apparently, you really do not like cats. This is the EU statistics of households who have more than one cat, and proudly at the top of the list is Romania. 45% of Romanian households have at least one cat. Bottom of the list is Slovakia with 12%. So I don't know what the problem in Slovakia is with cats, but I really think that's one issue you need to consider. And I also have found out that at least my fellow journalists here are maybe not maybe they're not going through the best times. I've heard them called this. You probably know this. This was your prime minister, if I'm not mistaken, calling some journalists dirty anti-Slovak prostitutes, which, I'm a journalist too, so I guess I'm in good company. So these are the things that I've learned just in a few days, that you're anti-Muslim, anti-cats, anti-Slovak, but at least you love Christmas. That is certain. I've seen it. So these are all stories that we tell, and these are all narratives that are going around in your culture and in our culture. And this is why I say it's a complicated time. You might have heard that the word post-truth has been chosen as the Oxford Dictionary Word of the Year. And for those of us who do journalism, that is really bad news. And as Jan was saying, people are more inclined to believe conspiracy theories than real news. And this is nothing new. It's just that they're spreading so much wider and so much faster. And I think journalists in Europe and in the US and all over the world are coming to terms with this very, very complicated reality that facts don't really matter that much anymore. And this is even hard for me to say, let alone, process. So what do matter are stories. And a lot of the stories that circulate in this world are untrue and are manipulative and are making people fearful and are making people say the kinds of things that I've just showed you. Yesterday there was a piece of news going around in Romania. We have parliamentary elections on Sunday. And there was a piece of news that said our current prime minister is George Soros's illegitimate son. No source, no nothing, on a really obscure website. It was shared more than 10,000 times in one day. Okay? So, by the way, the name George Soros is the one that has been spoken most often ahead of the Romanian elections. So you can imagine what people back home will think of me when I know where I am. So I'm here because I still believe that stories are powerful, and because they're so powerful and because they lead people to believe the wrong things and they lead people down, stray alleys, I think that we as journalists, as activists, as NGO workers, we can take stories back and we can try to counter the narratives that exist with narratives of our own. So my purpose today to open the discussion is to show you a little bit about why stories work, why they're so powerful and why they catch on, and then show you a little bit about how we try to use the mechanism of story to tell complicated stories from Romania. This is my niece, Anna. And Anna's at an age where my brother and his wife will start telling her stories. And you've all been there. I grew up on the stories that my grandfather told me. We used to sit in bed every night and I would pester him to tell me stories of knights who are trying to save kingdoms and save princesses. And he would make up stories for me, like night after night after night, and I couldn't get enough of them. And it's partly where I learned most of what I know about the world. It's probably where I got a sense of right and wrong. So stories are a very powerful mechanism for learning. And we learn about the world and about who's good and who's bad and who we need to save and who we need to help through these stories. So the problem is that as we grow up, we start shying away from the word story. And I'm really glad that you're using it in this context boldly, and it's in the program, because we start to believe that stories are things children tell. They're fairy tales, and fairy tales mean that they're not important, that they're soft, they're not true, they're not for serious people, they're not for adults. They have no data, especially those of you who work in NGOs. You love Microsoft Excel, and we love charts, and we love to show statistics, and we love to tell people this is the truth because this is what the facts say. And we stop telling stories. And my first advice to you today, and then I'll try to convince you that this is important, is to not stop. Is to keep that storytelling spirit that you learned as a child, to keep it alive, because it matters a lot. If anyone tries to teach you how to do storytelling, it's always a good skill to freshen up, but it's in your DNA. And I wanna share this quote with you that I really love speaking about fairy tales. This is from an American essayist, and she says, "Fairy tales are about trouble, about getting into and out of it, and trouble seems to be a necessary stage on the route to becoming. All the magic and glass mountains and pearls the size of houses and princesses beautiful as the day and talking birds and part-time serpents are distractions from the core of most stories, the struggle to survive against adversaries, to find your place in the world, and to come into your own." Which means that we are built of stories, and we're built of a lot of stories, and we're built from a lot of stories of loss, and stories where we had to struggle, and stories where we had to fight against all sorts of elements to become who we are. Does anyone here watch Westworld? If you've not started watching Westworld, do. It's a great show about telling stories, but it's also a show where humans build robots. I'm going to simplify this. And they put at the core of the programming a tragedy. Right? So the whole personality of the robot is built around a tragic story from their past that anchors them. Another quote on our relationship to stories, this is from the philosopher Richard Kearney, and he says, "When someone asks you who you are, you tell your story. That is, you recount your present condition in the light of past memories and future anticipations. You interpret where you are now in terms of where you have come from and where you are going to." So think about this. All of you here, you have a story that you tell about yourselves, and you have a story that you tell the world about yourselves. And the people you want to convince to change the way they see the world have their own stories of how they came to be who they are. And imagine what it would take for someone to convince you to change your story of yourself. And that's how hard it's going to be for you to convince them to do the same. And stories are... Science has shown that stories have been an essential mechanism for our species to survive. If there were no stories, then caveman number 1 could not tell caveman number 2 where the food is, or where that dangerous predator that's going to eat them is. Or if there were no stories, that there would be no way for you to share the things that you love, because you tell stories about your grandma's chicken soup, the special hill you ski down on, the first time your baby talked. Those are all stories that make you who you are. And at the same time, the things you fear are also stories, right? Maybe you fear the dark, or that weird uncle that has had too many Tatra teas, or, I don't know, refugees and immigrants, anyone that's the other. And this is not only at the level of the individual. I don't know your country that well, but I'm assuming it's not that different from the stories that Romania tells about itself. And most of the stories that Romania tells about itself are the story of a victim that is always, the other country next to us has always had it better. They have had all the luck. We're a victim. We can't do anything. We have a saying in Romanian that says "Asta este," and that translates as "it is what it is," meaning nothing can be changed. And that's a powerful story because it blocks you from doing anything. Okay, so think of all these narratives that are circling around you in your personal life, in your community, in your organization, in your group of friends, in your country, and now think of how can you tell a counter story to change this. And what I want to share with you now is what I think is a way of looking at stories that makes us understand their power and why they have such a grip on us. And then maybe if we understand this, we can use some tools to use stories to create change and bring about some good in the world. So, we're wired for stories. And I'm going to show you this clip. This is like a minute and 20 seconds. If you've seen this, please don't spoil it for the others, because I'm going to ask you about it. Okay, what just happened? Who wants to share what went through their mind as they watched this? Come on, there are no right answers. I'm just curious. What did you think of while watching this? What happened? Nobody? Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Okay. And the other two were students? Okay. And this is a mean teacher that wouldn't let the students do what they want? Okay. Other interpretations? Does that track with... Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering if there were leader and there were followers.
Okay.
So there was not always clear who was the leader and who was the follower. They had to find what kind of rule did they have. And they end up with just being free. All of them, and he also, the last one.
I think that might be just the most optimistic interpretation of this that I've ever heard. But that's great. Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. Something else? Yeah.
Well, something like a story of a friendship where the other triangle tried to disrupt it because it was kind of like interspecies with all these circles and triangles, whereas the second triangle wanted to keep the relationship like tidy or something within the one, like race, let's say.
Okay. So it could be a stories of, interspecies love, right? There's the dot and the triangle, and against all odds, they're trying to be together, but the big triangle won't let them. Does that track with some of the things you thought while watching this? That there's two shapes that want to be together, maybe in some form or another, and then there's another one that won't let them? Yeah? That's pretty much what people who watched this thought. This was done in 1944. This is a perception experiment. And in truth, because we're all smart people here, all we really watched are some shapes moving on a screen. Right? A triangle, a ball, another triangle, some lines. But look at the stories you constructed. I'll show you something else. He went to the store. He was run over by a bus. She went hungry and cried. What happens here? Come on. Why? What happens in this tragedy? The man dies and the woman is sad. Okay? Do you guys agree? Is sad and hungry? Yeah, go ahead.
But also, it can be three different people. They don't have to have anything in common.
Thank you. It can be three different people because I never told you that the sentences are connected. But most of you tried very hard to connect them. And I bet that for some of you in this room, if not most of you, something along the lines of this happened. There was a guy who went to the store. On his way to the store, or on his way back from the store, he got he got run over by a bus, and the woman was left hungry and sad. Or maybe he went to the store because she was hungry and sad, and he got killed while going to the store. Right? That's pretty much what all of you thought. Let me show you one more thing. Oh, that was fast. How many of you see a big ugly monster chasing a small ugly monster? Okay. How many of you think they're running from something that's scarier than both of them? Okay, a few more. This is actually an optical illusion. They're the same size. And all these three examples, and I could show you more, are proof that there's something that your brain is doing without you wanting it to do that. And that is, your brain is desperate to create meaning. And your brain is desperate to put things in order. And putting things in order, this happened, then that happened, then that happened, is the basic way a story works. So your brain, without you wanting it to do that, creates stories. So when I told you that it's a bad idea to try to stop telling stories and start projecting charts, it's because it's in your DNA. And your brain, who's sometimes your best friend and sometimes your worst enemy, creates stories for you. It creates meaning, it creates consequence, and studies have shown that you go insane, like if you can't make meaning out of something after 35 seconds. Remember the last time you might have gone to a contemporary art museum and there was something on the wall that didn't make sense to you, but then you stood there in front of it until you created a story? Why are there 5 circles? Well, I have an explanation for that. That's your brain creating stories. It's in your natural, it's in our bones to do this. And this is very important for us to understand, because every time we wonder, why do so many people believe in conspiracy theories? Why did we see a Romeo and Juliet type of stories in some triangles moving? is because we are very, very easily swayed by stories. Not data, not charts. Those help, but most of us don't have the time to go through life every day putting on the mind of the hat of the rational thinker. We mostly let stories talk about us. I picked the title of my talk from this quote that I love very much, which is from the American writer Joan Didion, and she says, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live." And at first this sounds very soft and nice and gooey. Stories are good. We share stories to be part of a community. We share stories to be with other people. This is the extended quote that this is taken from, and it says, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live. We look for the sermon in the suicide, for the social or moral lesson in the murder of 5. We interpret what we see, select the most workable of the multiple choices. We live entirely by the imposition of a narrative line upon disparate images." So now that you know the secret about how stories work and what they do to your brain, our brain, I will try to show you how we try to use this in the stories that we tell. So by the way, if we tell ourselves stories in order to live, then we tell ourselves stories in order to do all of these things. So think about the things you want to change, and think about the stories you need to tell and the things you need to show to make people do any of these in a different way. Because no matter how intelligent and rational we are in the faces of the choices we make, we usually choose, buy, vote, change, decide to leave or decide to stay, or whatever we choose to do based on some kind of stories that we tell ourselves. Okay, so I hope that was not depressing. Now that you know that stories manipulate the hell out of us, good ones and bad ones. Let's see how we can do that consciously. So, what goes into a story? I will go through the basic elements of a story, and I'll do that by showing you a story that we've worked on and that we're still working on for 2 years now. So, on the right here, this is Mirela. Mirela is most of you in the audience, or some of you in the audience. She went to college. She went to college outside of Romania. She worked for a number of institutions, and now she works for a big international NGO that deals with children. And she strongly believes that the way you help children in poverty and the way you fix bureaucratic violence, I know that's an NGO term, is by fixing the system. So not helping the individuals, not giving money to the children begging on the street, but fixing the system, changing the policies, making sure the government doesn't discriminate, doing all those great things we want to see. So one day Mirela reads this article that there are women with children begging in the subway in Bucharest, and that the children are sedated so that the mothers can carry them around for hours while they beg. And she gets very enraged and pissed off by this, and happens to take the subway that day. And in the subway station, she meets Madalina and her daughter. And Madalina is in the subway. Madalina is 19. She has 2 children. And she travels an hour from a village outside of Bucharest to beg in the subway every morning. So Mirela, who never does that, remember, right? She's a system fixer kind of person. She stops Madalina and her baby and says, "Do you want something to eat?" And she takes her and gives her something to eat, gets to know her, learns that Madalina comes from a poor Roma family. Her husband is somewhere outside of the country, working, he says. She lives with his family. That's her mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, father-in-law are really nasty to her and the two kids because she's taking up a lot of space in their house, and they're kicking her out every day and sending her to beg in Bucharest in the subway. So Mirela says, okay, I don't usually help individual people, but I will try to do that now and see where it takes me. So she takes Madalina, gets her teeth fixed. She helps her fill out paperwork so she could get more state aid. I'll get to that. And because Mirela's smart, she says, well, what if I get my friends to help? And she writes about it. She tells people that I've met this young mother and I'm trying to help her. And what I'm trying to help her do is build an extra room in the house of her in-laws so she and the kids can live there and no longer be harassed by the in-laws. So a group of people starts donating money to Madalina through Mirela so she can build this house and this extra room. And this is Madalina with the nails and all the other construction materials necessary for that extra room to be built. And these are photographs that accompanied this story when we first wrote it. And we published the story, and it ends on a happy note, right? The extra room gets built, and a bunch of other people joined this group of people helping Madalina, and there's a Facebook group called the Village for Madalina, right? It takes a village to raise a child. So apparently it takes a village to take a young mother out of poverty. That's their idea. That's where we stopped the story about 1.5 years ago. And I can go into details where the story is now during the Q&A. The short version is, the story got way more complicated, but the short version is there is still a group of 30, 40 people that are hanging on to Madalina for dear life, trying to help her, but at the same time asking a very complicated question, which I'm sure many of you ask each day: what's the best way to help someone? And sort of that's the story we wanted to tell. That's the story we wanted to plant in our audience's head. Make them ask themselves that question. How can I help? What's the most effective way to help? And so on. So I told you I'm going to show you what the elements of the story are. So this is what a good story needs. And these are very long. The stories I'll tell you about are very long and complicated. We spend 3 months, 4 months, 6 months working on them. When they're published, they're pretty big. I'm not saying that's the only journalism you need to do, but in order for you to enter the world of another character, you need space and time, just like in a good documentary movie. So you need to have character. You need to have characters that are in a conflict, are in a situation where they want something that they can't get. You need to have action that moves the story. You need to have the kinds of details that I told you about. And sort of the basic, simplest definition of a story is there's a character in a particular situation, shit goes wrong, then there's an idea that can fix this, then it gets fixed, and the person is happy. Right? That's the basic arc of a story. There's a problem, the character fixes the problem, the character is happy. And I suggest you try to use this arc when you think about the stories you can tell. And because we like definitions, I put this in a definition too. So you can think of stories as detailed narratives of characters struggling to overcome obstacles and reach important goals. This is very important. We work a lot with NGOs in Romania. We sometimes help them tell stories. They have a hard time talking about the bad that led to the good. They want to talk about all the good that was done through their project. They don't really want to talk about how bad it was before they fix things. And I'll just say this once. There is no story without something bad that needs to be fixed. That's why you did your project. That's why you do your work, because you want to turn something bad into something good. Stories are about change or about trying to change stuff. So do not run away from struggle and obstacles. These are the stories we want to do and the stories we do, and we think of them as news you can feel, because we want to take you into the world of people that are not like you, and try to get you to understand what it's like as best as you can. Our biggest goal, and this is hard to achieve, but when stories work, they can create empathy. And empathy is being in the shoes of your characters, trying not necessarily to accept them, because sometimes that might be too much, and we've seen people read some of our stories, and it doesn't mean they suddenly accept a minority of any kind, but at least they have a degree of understanding that they did not have before. And you're probably wondering if it works. I just put this on there as a reminder. I hope all of you still read stuff. I love this quote from C.S. Lewis, who says, "We read to know we are not alone." And I guarantee you that it works. So I'll just run through a few stories and tell you what happened because of them being published. This is his name is Tamango, very famous Roma musician in Romania. Was a charmer all his life. Women went crazy for him. He had a very deep voice, sang throughout his life, and then suddenly a lot of outrage on the part of our readers that he was not helped by the people who propelled him into music and into the radio stations. So the family got some donations, they got some help, but here's the most important thing, at least to us, that happened. His wife brought the magazine over to his bedside. By the time we published the story, he couldn't move. This was 2011, the end of 2011. And she started reading the story to him. And he was on his bed, and he was nodding his head, and then he was crying at stories from his own life, and then he was laughing at the good parts, and then he kept going like this, and saying, "That's true, I was somebody once." And this is one thing stories can do. Our story to him and to his family were an incredible validation that he existed, that he was somebody once, and he did great things. Unfortunately, he passed away 6 months later, but there's something. So sometimes when you write about characters that are in very desperate situations, don't be too naive to think you can save them or that the world will save them, but you can always take them to a better place. His wife right now runs is that 1 minute? His wife now runs the parents' union at the school and is now raising money to give winter clothes to children. So she became very active in that community. I'll just run through these and I'll let you ask questions. Did I break this? I'll skip this. This is a teacher in a Romanian high school that was accused on national television of homosexual propaganda because she taught human rights in class to her children. It was a big scandal in Romania 3 years ago. We spent 6 months with her trying to tell a story about how she teaches the way she does and why she does it. And we published a story about the fact that what she does is teach kids how to be free. That is her main aim. And I'll read you what she told us after the story came out. "I understood I'm not alone, not at all. I understood literature has a greater power than I gave it credit. I understood that we don't really know each other until somebody offers us their love and patience and asks us what happened then so many times that we understand why." So this story made her feel safer in the kind of teaching that she does. This is a transgender man. We published a big profile of him this summer. It's a very big, complicated story, and he got a lot of messages from people that were not only praising him for being courageous, but also, even though they might still be scared of transgender people, sympathizing with him in terms of what he went through with his family. Because most of the story was centered around how he transitioned for 10 years while holding on desperately to the relationship he had with his mother and father. One more and I'm done. We had a big fire in Romania last fall in a club. 64 people died at a rock concert. Our government fell because of it. And for the past year, we've published stories of people who died there or who survived the fire. And we published a profile of her. You could see how badly burned she is. And this was and is our most read story of this year. Now, we're a small magazine, so we're not talking huge numbers. But our most read story is this. In an age of clicks and cats and that kind of stuff, there's like 70 or 80,000 people who read the story online. So there is some impact, and I would encourage you to try doing the same. And I think what would be best if I stop now and if I can answer some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cristian Lupsa, for this amazing, awesome presentation. And actually, we have some questions here, and I think they have a lot to do. Some of them came before you started, at the very beginning, but they have a lot to do with your perspectives you mentioned. And I would maybe start with the one which got most likes, and which, because it fits perfectly. You just mentioned that online, this particular story was read by more than 500,000 people, and
100,000.
Oh, 100,000. Okay, but your printed magazine Door is selling around 3,500 copies. You mentioned, and the important question is: so how do you try to get the long reads, to long forms, to the wider audience? How to bring it closer to the people in Romania? Is it something specific, or is it something very typical for contemporary European society?
As you probably know, we don't, well, I think that happens here too. We would rather watch a 30-second video than spend 30, 40 minutes with a story. So it's not easy to get people to read long stuff. But thankfully, I think what has happened over the past year, and this has been true in Western countries too, it's not that people don't read or consume long stuff anymore. They do. It just has to be good. Just the fact that it's long doesn't mean that it will automatically be good. Long form writing, narrative journalism, the kind of work that I do is not a typical form for this part of the world. And I know you guys have stronger daily media than we do in Romania, but from what I know, you don't try much of long form and much narrative. You should. And if they penetrate society and how and whether they create change, it's complicated. We do know that our stories were read. We did a lot of stories on poverty. We did a lot of stories on domestic violence. We know they get read by people in the government. We know that they were part of the reason, part of discussions when the government created an anti-poverty strategy. So they do get to some places. They do have some impact. But I think my main advice is don't expect a form of story or a way of telling a story to create a larger, just a huge change. I'm very happy if I have 5 readers that say they've changed their position on a perspective because of a long story. And I'll give you a quick example. I teach at the University of Bucharest in the journalism school, and I took 6 students with me to a documentary theater play about the transgender community in Bucharest. They had never met anyone, so not that they haven't met anyone who's transgender, they've not met anyone who's gay or lesbian, so nobody that was unlike them. 4 of them cried through the entire play And they cried because they had no idea how hard it is for other people in the society to move around. So we're not going to change the minds of 60,000 people by telling a story, but we might change the mind of 6, who then might change the mind of 3 more, or at least that's how I try not to set the bar at a standard that we cannot meet and then be disappointed.
Okay, so you mentioned the new series Westworld, and you mentioned the tragedy implemented into the robots.
Right.
But here's this question dealing with the negative stories. So, because the characters you showed us today, they were also going through very difficult times, and they're very complex characters in complicated situations. So, why do you think negative stories prevail and are more popular than the positive examples? Well, you had some positive at the beginning as well, but
for me, it's the word negative is complicated because we journalists always get attacked that we only care about negative stuff. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I do think we care about conflict, but we care about conflict because there's always conflict and tension around us. If I want to go to one university and study philosophy, and my mother and father want me to go to business school, that's a gigantic conflict in our family and in my life. So I don't think that negative stories prevail. I think that there are stories about negative things going on. I do think there are stories about bad things going on. I don't think there are enough stories that show us moments when those bad or negative things changed, or people that work to change the bad into the good, that try to show this kind of progression that I try to talk about, that show this narrative arc of things changing. Because I don't think we need to run away from the bad. We don't need to run away from all the suffering that's going on. And I'm not saying we need to put it into a positive context, but we need to frame it in a way where people act upon negative stuff to try to change them into something good, which is what all of you are doing.
Cristian, just very shortly, the last question we have time for. I was very happy to see the name Joan Didion on your presentation. Unfortunately, she's not that well known in Slovakia yet. A little bit more in Czech translations, but who is your favorite storyteller? Probably many of them, but maybe one the most loved.
There's an American journalist that I really love because he has a special way of blending the truth of something with literary devices. His name is Michael Paterniti. He writes for the American magazine GQ right now. And he is particularly skilled at taking things that are very difficult to talk about, school shootings, plane crashes, suicide, and making them not into happy stories, but in stories that reveal something about our common humanity and the way we deal with grief and the way we try to process grief and the way we try to make some changes around us so it won't be as negative the next time around.
Cristian, keep your good work. All the best for your writing. Thank you very much. Ďakujeme
Thank
veľmi
you.
pekne. Poprosím vás ešte o potlesk od Cristiana Lupsu.